The symphony of the city was a language Sarah understood better than any other. It was a chaotic orchestra of blaring horns, the distant wail of sirens, and the rhythmic hiss of bus brakes. For the past 4 years, this concrete and steel landscape had been her world, its harsh melodies the soundtrack to her life. Her home was a shifting territory, defined by the overhang of a shop awning, the relative warmth of a subway grate, or the sheltered corner of a forgotten alleyway. Her only constant, her anchor in this relentless current, was Buddy, a scruffy terrier mix whose fur was the color of dust and whose loyalty was as solid as the skyscrapers that dwarfed them. Sarah was 22, but the streets had carved older lines of worry and wisdom onto her face. Her eyes, a pale, watchful blue, missed nothing. They saw the subtle shift in a pedestrian's gaze from pity to annoyance. They knew which shopkeepers would leave out day-old bread and which would call the cops. She moved through the city like a ghost, an integral part of its machinery that most people chose not to see. Her possessions were few, carried in a worn-out backpack, a faded wool blanket, a half-empty water bottle, a small first-aid kit, and a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The book was her most prized possession, a relic from a past life, a time of classrooms and soft beds. Its pages were a sanctuary, a reminder of a world where justice and empathy were things worth fighting for. Her community was a mosaic of broken souls, a tribe bound not by blood, but by shared invisibility. There was George, a Vietnam vet with a cough that rattled his thin frame, who had appointed himself the guardian of their small, informal encampment under the overpass. He shared his meager rations, told stories of a different America, and always saved a pat on the head for Buddy. There was Maria, who hummed sad, beautiful songs in Spanish while meticulously arranging her collection of discarded glass bottles. And there were others, faces that came and went, each carrying a silent story of loss and survival. They looked out for each other in small, profound ways, a shared cigarette, a warning about a dangerous part of town, a quiet presence on a cold night. It was a fragile ecosystem, but it was theirs. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows between the buildings, Sarah was sitting against the brick wall of a bakery, sharing the crust of a bagel with Buddy. The smell of warm bread was a sweet torture. Most people hurried by, their faces buried in their phones, their minds on deadlines and dinner plans, but one man stopped. He was older, with a kind, weary face and a simple trench coat. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just looked at her, then at Buddy, and a small smile touched his lips. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $5 bill. "I don't want to insult you," he said, his voice gentle, "but I want you to have this. Don't just buy food. Buy something that gives you hope." Sarah was stunned into silence. $5 was a fortune. It meant a hot meal, maybe 2. But his words echoed in her mind. Buy something that gives you hope. She stammered a thank you as he walked away, disappearing back into the anonymous river of people. She held the bill in her hand, the paper feeling impossibly significant. Hope. What did that even look like? For a moment she thought about a hot cup of coffee and a sandwich, the simple, immediate hope of a full stomach. But the man's words had planted a different seed. Later that day, while walking past a small convenience store, she saw the sign, Powerball Jackpot, 180 million. People rushed in and out, clutching their little slips of paper, their faces filled with a giddy, almost childish optimism. Sarah had always seen the lottery as a stupid tax, something for people who had money to throw away on impossible dreams. It was a world away from her reality, which was measured in single dollars and cents. Yet, the word hope returned to her. What was a lottery ticket if not the purest, most concentrated form of hope you could buy? A fantasy packaged in a $1 slip. On a whim, driven by a feeling she couldn't quite name, she pushed open the glass door. The bell chimed, and the clerk barely glanced at her. Inside it was warm and smelled of coffee and cleaning supplies. She felt out of place, her worn clothes a stark contrast to the brightly colored packaging on the shelves. She walked to the counter, the $5 bill clutched in her hand. "One Powerball ticket, please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The clerk grunted, his eyes on a small television behind the counter. She needed to pick 5 numbers and a Powerball. Her mind went blank. What numbers mattered? Her birthday. She didn't like to think about her birthday. Then an idea surfaced, born from the only part of her life that felt true and good. Her first number was 8 for August, the month she had found Buddy shivering in a cardboard box behind a diner. The next was 14, the day it happened. He had been so small, a terrified scrap of life, and in saving him, she had felt a piece of herself being saved too. Her third number was 4, for the 4 years they had been together. Her fourth was 27, the number of the alley where they had found their most consistent and safest sleeping spot. The fifth number was 1, for the one constant companion she had in the world. For the Powerball, she chose 10, the age she was when she first read To Kill a Mockingbird. She paid for the ticket, along with a can of dog food for Buddy and a bottle of water for herself. The total came to $4.87. She took the ticket and the few coins of change and left the store, her heart beating a little faster. It was a foolish, reckless thing to do. George would have told her to buy a pair of thick socks instead, but as she walked back toward the underpass, she couldn't suppress a strange, unfamiliar flutter of excitement. She tucked the ticket carefully between pages 148 and 149 of her book, right in the middle of Atticus Finch's closing argument. It felt like the safest place in the world. There, surrounded by words of integrity and courage, her little slip of paper, her tiny investment in hope, would rest. The days that followed were no different from the ones that came before. The lottery ticket was all but forgotten, a momentary diversion. The autumn air grew colder, and the nights became a battle for warmth. Sarah and George managed to find a few discarded pallets to lift their bedding off the freezing concrete. Buddy burrowed close to her each night, a living furnace against the biting wind. The drawing came and went without a thought from Sarah. Her focus was on the immediate, the tangible. Finding enough food, staying dry during a sudden downpour, keeping Buddy safe from bigger, aggressive stray dogs. About a week later, Sarah was huddled in the entrance of the public library, using their free Wi-Fi on a cheap, cracked smartphone she'd found. She was scrolling through local news, looking for weather updates and any information on shelters opening up for the winter, when a headline caught her eye. "Still no winner for $180 million Powerball jackpot sold in city." Her breath caught in her throat. The article mentioned the winning ticket was sold at a small convenience store on Elm Street, the same store she'd gone into. A cold dread, mixed with a wild, terrifying spark of possibility, washed over her. It was impossible. Things like that didn't happen to people like her. Life had taught her to expect the worst, to never dare to hope for too much. Her hands trembled as she pulled the backpack onto her lap. She fumbled with the zipper, her fingers feeling clumsy and numb. She pulled out the worn book, its cover soft with age. The other homeless people around her paid no mind, lost in their own worlds. She opened it to the middle, her heart hammering against her ribs. There it was, the small, flimsy slip of paper. She pulled up the lottery website, her eyes scanning the winning numbers, 8, 14, 4, 27, 1, and the Powerball, 10. Sarah stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. The numbers blurred. It couldn't be real. It was a mistake. She was reading it wrong. She read them again and again. They remained the same. Every single number matched. A wave of dizziness hit her. The world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the city faded into a dull roar. $180 million. The number was so vast, so abstract, it had no meaning. She felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest, but it came out as a choked sob. She shoved the ticket and the book back into her bag, zipped it up, and wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. She needed another pair of eyes. She needed someone to tell her she was crazy. She found George near the river, feeding pigeons from a small bag of crumbs. His face was etched with the usual stoicism. "George," she said, her voice shaking, "I need you to look at something. I think I'm losing my mind." She handed him the phone with the numbers on the screen and then the lottery ticket. He held the small slip in his calloused fingers, squinting. He looked from the ticket to the phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. He did it 3 times. The world seemed to stop for Sarah as she waited for his verdict. Finally, he lowered his hands and looked at her. The tough, weary mask on his face crumbled, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. A slow smile spread across his lips, a genuine, wide smile that reached his tired eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, kid, you did it. You actually did it." The confirmation didn't bring the explosion of joy she might have expected. Instead, a profound and terrifying silence fell over her mind. The weight of that number, 180,000, crashed down on her. She looked around at the gritty pavement, the murky river, the distant skyline. This world, the only one she knew, suddenly felt like a photograph that was fading at the edges. Everything was about to change, and Sarah had no idea what that meant. She sat down heavily on the cold bench, pulled Buddy close, and stared into a future that was now a blinding, terrifying, and utterly blank wall of white light. The first step into her new reality felt like stepping onto an alien planet. Claiming the prize was a surreal blur of lawyers, financial advisors, and flashing cameras. Sarah, guided by a pro bono lawyer the Lottery Commission had recommended, navigated the process in a daze. She chose the lump sum cash option, a staggering $94 million after taxes. The number was so absurd it felt like a joke. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. "From rags to riches," one headline screamed. "Homeless Cinderella story," read another. They painted a picture of a life of struggle magically erased by a stroke of luck, a fairy tale ending delivered. But as Sarah sat in the sterile, air-conditioned hotel room the lottery officials had arranged for her, with Buddy nervously sniffing the plush carpet, she felt more homeless than ever. The room was a golden cage. It had a bed, larger than her entire sleeping space under the overpass, a bathroom with a tub she could swim in, and a view of the city that transformed its gritty reality into a beautiful, silent panorama of twinkling lights. But the silence was deafening. There was no rumble of the early morning garbage trucks, no distant sound of Maria's humming, no reassuring rasp of George's cough. The comfort felt foreign and suffocating. She tried to sleep in the enormous bed, but the clean, starched sheets felt cold and empty. After an hour of tossing and turning, she took her old wool blanket from her backpack, laid it on the floor, and curled up with Buddy, finally finding a fragile semblance of sleep. Her new advisors were kind, but spoke a language she didn't understand. Portfolios, trusts, capital gains. They advised her to disappear for a while, to change her appearance, to sever ties with her past for her own safety. "Everyone will want a piece of you now, Sarah," a polished man named Mr. Davies told her, his tone a mix of caution and paternalism. He suggested mansions in gated communities, trips around the world, a life of insulated luxury. He saw her as a problem to be managed, a fragile vessel into which this immense fortune had been poured. He couldn't understand that the past he wanted her to sever was the only life, the only family she had. For a week, she tried to play the part. She bought new clothes that felt like costumes and ate at restaurants where the menus didn't have prices. She was polite, quiet, and utterly miserable. Every interaction felt transactional. Every smile seemed to hide a calculation. The loneliness was an ache far deeper than any hunger she had ever known. She missed the raw, unfiltered humanity of the streets. She missed the simple act of sharing a scavenged meal with George, the feeling of looking out for one another against a world that didn't care. The breaking point came during a meeting to discuss real estate. A slick agent showed her pictures of a sprawling, sterile mansion with more bedrooms than she could count. It's the ultimate in privacy and security, the agent beamed. Sarah looked at the image of the cold, perfect house surrounded by high walls, and all she could see was a prison. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The men in suits stopped and looked at her. "No?" Mr. Davies asked, confused. "I'm not buying a house like that," she clarified, a strange sense of calm settling over her. For the first time since cashing the ticket, she knew what she wanted. "I'm going back." The advisors were horrified. "Sarah, you can't be serious. It's not safe. People know who you are." "The streets were never safe," she replied, looking him directly in the eye. "But they were my home." That afternoon, dressed in her old jeans and a new but simple hoodie, Sarah walked back to the underpass. She had a bag of fresh groceries in one hand and Buddy trotting happily by her side. As she approached, she saw the familiar figures of her street family. George was sitting on an overturned bucket, looking thinner and more worried than before. When he saw her, his face flooded with relief, followed quickly by confusion. "Sarah, what in God's name are you doing here? I saw you on the news. I thought you'd be in Paris by now." "I missed you, George," she said simply, handing him a warm loaf of bread. She spent the evening there, sharing food and stories. She listened to what had happened in her absence. She learned that the city was planning a sweep of the area, a polite term for dismantling their encampment and forcing them to move on. The fear and uncertainty in their eyes was a familiar pain. They didn't ask her for money, not once. They were just glad to have her back, to have a piece of their fragmented family restored. It was in that moment, sitting on the cold ground surrounded by the only people who had ever truly seen her, that her purpose became crystal clear. The money wasn't a ticket out, it was a tool. It was the ultimate resource to fight a battle she had been losing her entire life. The next morning, Sarah called Mr. Davies. "I need you to set up a foundation," she said, her voice filled with a newfound authority. "And I need to hire a team, not just financial people. I need social workers, housing advocates, and lawyers who specialize in tenants' rights. And I want to buy a building." The project that followed was audacious and unprecedented. Sarah, with the help of a team she vetted herself, bought a large, defunct hotel in a forgotten part of the city. It wasn't a shelter, she was adamant about that. Shelters had curfews, rules, and a transient feel. This was to be a home. She worked alongside the construction crews, insisting on designs that prioritized dignity and community. She repurposed large suites into apartments for families, created single rooms with private bathrooms, and designed communal spaces, a large kitchen, a library, a workshop, and even a professionally staffed kennel and dog run for residents' pets. Buddy was the official mascot. George was the first person she offered a room to. He was also the first person she offered a job to. With his military background and natural leadership, he became the head of resident services and security. Maria, with her eye for beauty, was put in charge of the community garden on the rooftop. Sarah didn't just give them a place to live, she gave them a purpose, a salary, and a stake in their own future. Sarah herself took a small, simple apartment on the second floor. Her door was always open. She knew every resident by name, knew their stories, their struggles and their dreams. She didn't leave the streets. She transformed a piece of them. She used her fortune not to isolate herself, but to build the biggest, safest and most supportive home she could imagine. The building, which she named the Atticus House, became a beacon of hope, a radical experiment in compassionate living. One evening, months later, Sarah stood on the rooftop garden, looking out at the city lights. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter from the communal patio below and the smell of Maria's blooming night jasmine. Buddy rested his head on her foot. George came and stood beside her, sipping a cup of hot coffee. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "I never thought I'd see a sky like this again without feeling cold. You did good, kid. You did more than good." Sarah smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes. The media had moved on, baffled by her choices. They couldn't understand why a woman who could have anything would choose this. But for Sarah, the answer was simple. She looked at the thriving community around her, at the faces filled with the security and dignity she had helped build. She had won $180 million, but her real fortune was here. It was in the shared laughter, the quiet acts of kindness, and the profound, unshakable knowledge that after a lifetime of searching, she was finally, truly home. Sarah's story teaches us that true wealth is not measured by the money we accumulate, but by the community we build and the purpose we find. Luck can change our circumstances, but it is compassion that defines who we are. For Sarah, the street was not just a place of hardship, but a home with bonds of loyalty and humanity that money couldn't buy. She discovered her greatest prize wasn't the winning ticket, but the opportunity to use her newfound fortune to give a voice, dignity, and hope to those society had forgotten, redefining the concept of home as a feeling of belonging, not a physical address. If you were moved by this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of hope and transformation.